History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. In the early 19th century, portraits of Native American leaders were commissioned, leading to the creation of History of the Indian Tribes of North America. Acquisitions librarian Kelly Brown shares the story of an Osage woman whose journey to Europe and back to St. Louis is captured in this historic collection.
History of the Indian Tribes of North America is a publication of volumes of hand-colored lithograph portraits and biographical profiles of Native American leaders and their companions. This publication is famed for the artistic quality of the prints, and in many cases, the images published in these volumes are the only existing image of an individual. Thomas McKinney was the superintendent of Indian Trade and later the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Realizing that white Americans' encroachment posed a destructive threat to the indigenous peoples, starting in 1821, he commissioned artist Charles Bird King to paint portraits of tribal delegations who visited Washington, D.C. The paintings hung in the Department of War until 1837, when they went to the Smithsonian Institution. 3 decades later, a fire destroyed all but 5 of the priceless originals. Towards the end of his career with the government in 1829, McKinney arranged to have artist Henry Inman secretly create copies of the paintings suitable to be converted into lithography and started to publish a collection of portraits accompanied by text descriptions of the portrait subject, written by McKinney and James Hall. The volume of hand-colored lithographic plates on display and collected is from a later edition of the work where the text of the biographical profiles is contained into 2 smaller volumes that accompanied the plate volumes. This edition was released after the Smithsonian fire and specifically calls this out as a selling point. For many of the indigenous people represented in these volumes, these paintings are their only known images. Mahongo, or Sacred Sun, was an Osage woman featured in this work with an incredible story. She was born around 1809 in a village which is now Saline County, Missouri. The Osage had cultivated commercial and social relationships with the French for over a century, and some had traveled to France in the 18th century. Playing on these previous ties, David Dulany, a French con man living in St. Louis, posed as a government representative and offered to take a small group of Osage to France in 1827, where they caused a sensation in the court of King Charles X. On their arrival in France, the group was greeted with great crowds, attended theaters and parties, saw demonstrations of hot air balloons and electricity, and were given many gifts. They were manipulated into performing across France while Dulany pocketed their earnings. Within a year, he had disappeared, either imprisoned by his creditors or abandoning the Osage once their popularity waned. The Osage were stuck without money in Europe, and Mahongo was pregnant. She gave birth to a daughter in 1828 while stranded with her party at a hotel in Belgium. The Osage were forced to wander around Europe until they found themselves in Paris again in 1829. Their plight was eventually covered in newspapers, and several individuals were moved to help. With the assistance of the Marquis de Lafayette and Bishop de Burgh, the Osage returned to the United States. Unfortunately, several members of the party died of smallpox on the journey home, including Mahongo's husband. Back in America, Thomas McKinney arranged for Charles Bird King to paint Mahongo's portrait in Washington, D.C., before helping her and the rest of the group return to St. Louis in 1830.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.